Mr. Mike Thomas.
How are you, sir? It's great to be on with you.
Thank you for coming on. Really excited. The release of the book, finally. You might remember me, The Life and Times of Phil Hartman. I guess the logical place to start when you were choosing the subject matter. Why Phil Hartman and why now?
I got the idea from a friend of mine in town here who was a former comic, and he emailed me out of the blue one day and said, how about Phil Hartman? He knew I'd been looking for subjects, and I went, oh my God, that's a brilliant idea, because I didn't know anything really about Phil Hartman's life. I had watched Phil all of his years on SNL. That was when I really started watching the show in '86, when he started with Dana Carvey and Jan Hooks and all those folks. So I knew his work, and I loved his work, and I thought nobody's really explored his life, and it started there.
Well, I've already read the book, and as I've said to you many, many times, you have captured his essence to the extent that it really felt like he was alive again to me for the first time in 16 years. So congratulations on that front, first and foremost.
Thank you very much. To hear that from people who actually knew Phil is really heartening, because I didn't know him. I did my best to bring him back to life on the page. That's just fantastic to hear.
Now, Mike, you had 300 pages to tell his story. After doing all of that research and with the book finally coming out, if you could sum up who you perceive Phil to be in maybe a sentence or two, how would you describe him?
I think Phil was an eminently decent human being. It's kind of hard to encapsulate him in one sentence. He loved to be goofy. He was also a serious guy. He was a deep thinker. He was just this guy with many, many facets.
In doing your research, what is the most surprising thing that you discovered about Phil Hartman?
The most surprising thing was discovering the depth of love for him. There's this emotional attachment to the man that I wasn't aware of. And this is not just from his close friends and family. This is from people who only knew him from news radio or SNL. Their attachment, though, goes beyond Phil's work. I think that's a testament to the man himself.
This is a very warts and all portrayal of his life, and nobody leads a perfect life, and I knew that there were going to be some things that I would read in this book that would upset me. And now, amongst some of his close circle, I know that has been the case, and when you do something like this, we all want everyone to like us, but how do you reconcile that kind of negative feedback when you do hear it?
Well, honestly, I have only heard some sort of secondary stuff. Nobody's given me negative feedback directly. I mean, all I've gotten so far has been positive. You captured the man, as you said, so I've been very heartened by that. But sure, I can see how some of the darker material in here might be off-putting to some of those who knew him, but that's my job as a biographer and a journalist, is to present the man, as you said, warts and all, and tell his full story. Otherwise, it's disingenuous.
Now, in relation to his relationship with his wife, Bryn Hartman, I will say this: so many things came so easily to him, be it comedy, be it flying a plane, be it his artistic and writing abilities. But the one area where he always seemed to struggle was with relationships. And this frustrated him to no end. And it really became sort of this toxic thing, which ended in a way that none of us ever expected. In recounting and in doing the research into that final night, which to me was extremely painful to read, I have to imagine that it was kind of painful to research as well.
It was, and it wasn't easy to write, both from an emotional standpoint and a sort of a logistical standpoint, because there's so many pieces, parts that I had to put together in order to reconstruct that scene, and I let the facts speak for themselves. I hope that comes through too. There's no need to amp anything up. I mean, it's such a traumatic occurrence. The final night, everything had kind of been leading up to that. I mean, Phil had always had trouble in his relationships. They would start out great, very intense, and then he would kind of pull away, and he didn't like conflict either, and that caught up to him with Bryn in a way, as you said, nobody could have expected.
Ironically, for as much as he pulled away, I got the sense as everything was going on that she was also pushing him away in this way. And he used the line that you actually have in the book about him retreating into his cave, and she would throw grenades to try and get him out. What would ultimately happen is the more grenades that were thrown, the further into the cave he went, frustrating them both.
You had mentioned that Phil was so good at so many things. Phil thought he could pull Bryn through her troubles, her addiction, through the power of his personality. Obviously, that doesn't work when you have somebody who's troubled like that, because addictions are a complicated thing.
Now, Mike, we've become friends, and as such, I have your best interests at heart, and I'm thinking financial here. What about this book being optioned and made into a movie?
I would love to see it be made into a movie. You know, a biopic would be fantastic. We'll see.
It's interesting in having that discussion with friends of mine Hartman and even family members of his. Who plays Phil Hartman in the movie? That's a very difficult role to cast because he had such depth as a performer.
He did. Phil was inimitable. So I think that is a big hurdle. I've always thought, and I'm sure you've thought this too and seen it written online, Bryan Cranston as the older Phil Hartman.
Oh, yeah. You know who I think for the younger, too, although he's probably too busy to ever do this, Jimmy Fallon, a guy who's a master impressionist and just continues to wow me with his talent the further he goes along here with The Tonight Show.
You may be right about that. I imagine he's a big Phil fan. I haven't heard him say that outright.
I believe he donated some money to the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right about that. Let's cast it right now.
Well, Mike, it's finally here. The book is out today in stores. You can get it online as well. You might remember me, The Life and Times of Phil Hartman. I have thanked you a million times for telling the world his story. I'm going to thank you again. And the other bonus is having gained your friendship throughout this whole thing. Best of luck to you with the book and everything else. And thanks so much for appearing on the show this morning.
Thanks, Brian. It was fantastic, and you were a huge help throughout this, and I'm looking forward to getting together.
And by the way, thank you for putting me on 8 pages because I didn't think I was that interesting.
You're very welcome.